Hello and welcome to episode 10 of my History of English series, Global English. Why did English go overseas? Out there. How did it become the world's number one international language? This is what we're going to explore today. If you enjoy this episode, please click the like and subscribe buttons. Okay, let's get into it.
In the last episode, I speculated that in some part of the world at the moment a word was being invented. I wasn't being absolutely serious, but one thing that distinguishes English from other languages is that apart from the native speakers, there is an enormous number of people who speak English as a second or foreign language. These people outnumber the native speakers by at least 3 to 1, if not more. In this episode, I will look at the global status of English, discuss what makes a person a native speaker, and how the different types of English speakers can be characterized. But how many English speakers are there in the world, and which countries have the most English speakers?
Okay, now let's look at these statistics. Can you guess which 6 countries have the largest number of English speakers? Okay, the top 6. So number 1, well done. It's the United States, with 280 million English speakers out of a population of 332. Number 2, India, with approximately 125 million English speakers out of a population of 1.39 billion. Obviously, colonial legacy, at least in part. What about number 3? Well, number 3 is Pakistan, with 94 million English speakers out of a population of 238 million people. So, number 4 must be England, or the UK, surely. In fact, number 4 is the Philippines. 90 million English speakers out of a population of 110 people. Another colonial legacy, this time from the United States. What about number 5? Number 5 must be the UK, surely. No, it's Nigeria, with approximately 79 million English speakers out of a population of 211 million. And number 6, yes, it's the UK. Approximately 60 million English speakers out of a population of 66 million. Surprised? Most people are. But how accurate are these statistics?
So why has English become a global language? One reason is obviously the British Empire, but that's not enough. There were other European colonial empires which never reached this level. Why is that? Obviously, the military and economic power of England and later the UK was superior to most other European powers, but how did that happen? Being an island helped, but also having modern financial institutions like a stock market, a central bank, and the ability to raise money via national debt, which people had confidence in investing in. France, Spain, and Portugal had none of these, at least in their earlier years. They were unable to raise money in the same way that Britain did, and indeed the Dutch Republic. In fact, most of the institutions came to us from the Dutch. Britain, from the late 17th and early 18th century and the beginning of the 19th century, was more than able to compete with other European countries that had superior natural resources because they were able to punch well above their weight. Another factor was the Industrial Revolution. Britain was able to outperform more powerful nations because it had superior production processes, but also based on the fact that individual people were able to invest without risk of the state blocking projects through bureaucracy and taxation, or in some cases, outright confiscation of their money. The bottom line is that military and economic power always count in the spread of languages. After the independence of the United States, there were 2 English-speaking powers that were spreading their influence all over the world. Another measure of the difference between the British Empire and other empires is the British Commonwealth. It is an association of over 50 countries, and it exists to foster international cooperation between these countries, trade links, and so on. After 70 plus years of its existence, the Commonwealth is still an amazing organisation, which remains a force for good in the world in general, and is the second largest international union of nations. Most member states are naturally ex-colonies, but they have been joined by other countries such as Mozambique, an ex-Portuguese colony, and Gabon, an ex-French colony. These countries have joined the Commonwealth not because it's British, but because they recognise the benefits of being part of an organisation which is also incredibly multicultural and spans every continent of the world, except, of course, Antarctica. I know that in Britain it is often fashionable to sneer at the Commonwealth, but the countries wouldn't join if there was no reason to do so. In theory, the King of the UK is the head of the Commonwealth. In reality, it's the Secretary-General who runs it. As you can see here, there's a list of the more recent Secretaries-General. So how do we define an English speaker? Certainly, the ability to say hello and how are you in a language doesn't make you a speaker of that language. You really need to have a level of the language that you can manage in almost every situation. What in the Council of Europe is called the C1 or advanced level, the ability to communicate in reading, writing, speaking and listening in the majority of circumstances. Whether this criteria is used in all the countries that we looked at before is not clear, but whatever, the statistics we see will probably be out of date by the end of the year. Things are changing that fast. As we can see from this diagram, the world's English language speakers can be divided into three categories. The inner circle consists of countries like the UK, USA, Canada, Australia, and so on. These were the countries that were settled by predominantly English-speaking immigrants, and even today are predominantly English-speaking. It's estimated that there are something like 411 million people in this category around the world. The outer circle consists of colonial legacy countries, as we've seen India, Nigeria, Kenya, and many others, and the English language is extensively used in these countries. It's estimated that this circle consists something in the region of 1 billion people. Then we have the expanding circle, which is basically everybody else. It's English as a means of communication with the rest of the world, and nobody really knows how many people of these countries can speak English to at least an advanced level. Whatever the number is, it's going up all the time. What about varieties of English that are often referred to as creoles? These forms, as I've said in a previous video, are a combination between English and various other languages. I'll talk about two very quickly. The first is Singlish, Singapore Colloquial English, which has elements of English, Malay, and Tamil, and various other Asian languages, in particular Cantonese and Mandarin Chinese as well. I'll show a couple of examples of how they work, and I'll leave a link in the description below so you can explore in more detail. So, here are some examples of Singapore Colloquial English. One of the most striking characteristics of this form of English is the use of sentence modifiers, instead of changes in intonation, word order, and so on, as we would use in English. In the first example, we can see that la at the end of the sentence requires assertiveness. The second sentence uses ha at the end of the sentence to indicate that a question is being asked. A in the third sentence indicates uncertainty, while the final one, ma, is when you ask for clarification or confirmation. These types of sentence modifiers are quite common in some Asian languages, but are not used in European languages. The second is Tok Pisin, spoken by approximately 12 million people in Papua New Guinea, and again it's combined with local structures and languages. The link I've left below is one of a news program, and check it out and see if you can understand what the lady is talking about. The question here is naturally, are these examples of English, are they dialects of English, or are they different languages? There is no easy answer to this. One thing is sure, the boundaries between the language and the dialects and the boundaries between different languages are not always clear. This is another reason why it's very difficult to measure how many people actually speak a language. A final consideration, why do some countries still use English as one of their official languages? To understand this, let's take the example of India and Nigeria. Let's start with India. We can see that the East India Company effectively dominated India from 1785 until 1858. In 1857, a large part of the East India Company army, especially in the province of Bengal, mutinied against the British-owned company. This was known as the Indian Mutiny, although some people prefer to call it the First Indian War of Independence. Whatever you call it, the facts remain the same. After this conflict, the British government took over direct government of India until 1947, when the country was partitioned between India and Pakistan, who both became independent nations. Throughout this period of indirect or direct British rule, most of the public administration of this enormous territory was carried out not by Britons, but by Indians, either as direct employees of the British Raj or as employees of whatever Indian prince they worked for. They used a quite elaborate form of English, and as a consequence, on independence, most of the managerial class of both nations could speak English. Although Hindi is an Indian language spoken by the largest number of people in India, it is not an absolute majority language, and in order to satisfy speakers of other Indian languages like Gujarati, Tamil, and so on, it was necessary to keep English as an official language because it was effectively neutral. Nigeria gained its independence in 1960, and here the situation was very similar. In fact, English was much more important because there was no other really dominant language, and again, English was neutral. Nigeria today enjoys a thriving English literature and a very successful film industry. Nigerian writers regularly win international awards. So this is the situation we find ourselves in. Although there are more Mandarin Chinese speakers than English speakers, English is spoken in a much wider range of countries and is a second language of choice for most of the countries of the world. And it seems to be expanding all the time.
So what about the future? What's going to happen next? Will English come to dominate the world? Or will another language take its place? Or something else? That's going to be the subject of the next episode, Whatever Next. Okay, bye for now.